Hi, thanks. So with that, we're going to spend a few minutes going through this, and I am going to explain a few more of these pieces parts, and Matt's going to jump in as well, so that you can see how the whole thing works. So in order to do this, of course, we had to figure out what to use. We had to go and think hard about what the style should look like. We had to figure out, how should these appear, what makes sense for you, and we can still rearrange these and you can rearrange them. We had to figure out how we're going to manage all the screenshots and then look at the fact that we need new contributions, but we also have existing docs that need to be updated. Then how can you do that on your own? So you can edit current existing content, create new documents. You can share your community content. We'll see an example of that through the INHS and Tommy McElrath, who's with us today. You can create short videos. In the future, you'll be able to help bring it to everyone in multiple languages. And you don't have to have a GitHub account to contribute, but it is extremely useful. Note the community documentation. Most of you know on all software, groups write their own sort of help docs for using that software. And so this is where you can share that so others in the community can benefit as well. We'll walk through sources real quickly in just a second. I just wanted to point out that here in sources, it's probably the most fleshed out in the manual section. And then the so-called scenarios. So once I've added sources to TaxonWorks, what might I want to do when I go to pull data out of those sources? And these are scenarios for how to deal with each of these situations. So let's take a quick tour. And I'm going to switch screens now, I think. Let's see here, Alt tab. Now I want the manual. There we go. Yay, it worked. So if we go to TaxonWorks docs and I go here and I put in homonym, right away I see it links to the sources documentation and takes me to a scenario that is talking about homonyms and replacement names, if that's the thing that I need to look at. If I search on taxon name, I can see that there's something in the data models. I can see that there's something about adding a new taxon name. So this is all the help in here is indexed, easily, very easy to search. Matt, is there another term? Oh, you mentioned asserted distribution. Oops. So here again, you can see the data models and you can see the tables for asserted distributions. So very powerful search. I'm looking at the time here. Languages, you can see Spanish is not here yet, but it is coming. And we were working on how to empower you to help us with that. This is links to GitHub, how to contact us, how to file a bug report. Again, it's right there, ready to go. Go to the API. This is when many of you are interested in starting a project, what we need for you to read and look at and know in order to do that. And then here in Guide, I want to show you really quickly the user interface we're looking for the manual. If we go here, you can begin to see what we'd like the screenshots to look like and how they behave and how we've structured this very quickly. You'll see explanation with a screenshot, followed by a list of bullet points that are steps to actually take. And you'll see this repeated over and over again. Explanation, screenshot, then groupings of sort of steps you can take. So this way, the same pattern over and over, you as the person who's writing the documentation or reading the documentation understands kind of the overall structure. We have, again, more user interface. And all of this, when you're reading it, you say, oh, I see a typo. Oh, I need to fix that. You see, edit this page. And doesn't matter where we are in TaxonWorks, it doesn't matter in the documentation. We're going to see this, edit this page. We're going to see, edit this page. And if we do, we click it. And this is where the GitHub account comes in. Now, if I needed to add something to this document, add this comment, I can say, I'm adding my documents. Oh, and I click commit. I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm going to do that just to show you what happens. It doesn't go directly to the website. It goes as a pull request. I think for me, it went because of the permissions that I have. But for you, what's going to happen is it will send us a request. It'll come in here in the pull request, and then we will look at it and accept it. And if we do, then it's merged into the live documentation. So that's everywhere. If you don't want to have a GitHub account for some reason, then it's a simple matter of sending us an email with what it is you want, or making a request in one of the meetings on Wednesdays, for example. Matt, would you like to point anything else out? Do you want to point out under develop?
Yeah, if you can go there, Debbie. So one of the big goals this year, and it's been a long time goal for us, was to better describe our model. The models and the tables, we got asked, well, what does your database look like? So what we did early this year in January was I wrote a bunch of scripts that actually automatically generate a description of the database and the model. So Debbie, if you can go to, just the data, click on data there. That's where this all starts. You'll get sort of a historical overview of how TaxonWorks data model came to be. And if you scroll down there, Debbie, you'll see who this document is sort of intended for. So even if you're a taxonomist and have never thought about databases, I think there's a need for understanding sort of how your data are going to be arranged in TaxonWorks. And we tried to outline how different people could, in different roles, could be using this documentation. And so you scroll a little further there, Debbie. We'll demo sort of how to see these pretty graphs in TaxonWorks, which are kind of just an interesting way of thinking about your data. And this kind of highlights how all of the things in TaxonWorks are objects, and they can all have annotations, etc. And then it gets to sort of the core concepts. And when you're really engaged in a particular database, it's important to understand the concepts to some degree. It will let you have more power with the system than if you just kind of use the forms and interfaces and use it however you think you've figured out how to use it. So understanding the model, I think, is a little important, especially for those who are doing sort of the very powerful things. If you understand it and can interact with it, then you can really take advantage of the more powerful features. Tommy's going to show you a lot about the filtering later here on in the day, for example, and we're going to show you how some of the data are rendered out into catalogs, etc. And those require a little bit of understanding about how the data is recorded in TaxonWorks. So there's some core categories, and then Debbie, if you can scroll down a little further, please. Then we have this simple diagram. It's sort of a simplified overview. These are all models within TaxonWorks, and these are all dynamically linked. Don't click right now, Debbie, but you can click on any of these things, and it will take you to the model. And if you scroll down a little further, let's see what we have. So there's a meta model that talks about sort of the different classes of data. Things like we have a whole class of annotations. You can tag, you can add your own custom fields, you can add notes. You can add alternative values for many fields, things like abbreviations or translations, that kind of thing. So there's a description of the meta model there. You can keep going, Debbie. Little further. we talk about how those models translate into code. So if you get into coding and contributing in TaxonWorks or thinking about writing your own imports, there's things there. So then from there, if you click on model, there's two major sections, and these are both dynamically generated. So we can update all of this HTML, all of the models behind this. We use a program called Dot to draw these graphs. And so each of these you can go through the core models. You'll recognize these from the interface of TaxonWorks, things like asserted distribution. Yeah, thanks. And you can click on any of those. And the main feature is if you scroll a little up there for attribution, Debbie, notice on the top there, right underneath it, there's three options. One will take you to the top. The second one will take you to the table definition as it's described in the database. And the third will take you to the RDoc. The RDoc is the programmer's, this is also automatically generated. This is the programmer's code documentation that's automatically generated. So what we have in the docs is now a powerful way of exploring the data model, better understanding it. I think it was a major contribution. It met the need people have been asking us for a long time. So from a yearly goal, this was a really nice thing to get done. And we hope it's a useful resource. We'd love to hear from you about how it could be improved, etc. What it sort of means to you in the long run. So I think that's the main part. Just to add, Debbie, I'm not sure how maybe you wrap it up and I'll, or if you're going to wrap it up and I'll think about adding something at the end, maybe.
That's great. I think the goal here is, of course, to get everyone comfortable. I would like to point out, so we worked a little bit here, a little bit is a euphemism, for contributing now, which is essentially, how can you add to the documentation as part of the community through like making small videos, through if you want to contribute to the code, it's here. If you want to contribute to the documentation. So this is essentially the style guide, and we go through something called Markdown. For those of you who've heard HTML, it's easier than that. It explains to you a little bit about the conventions that we've adopted for the look and feel that you see here. And we're ready to help you with that. And if it's, again, just give us the documentation and we can take care of this part if you're not up for the Markdown part yet, but we encourage you, it's not difficult. And we are ready to move forward now. If we go back to guide, for example, sources is fairly well filled out. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It's a work in progress, but we do need to move existing documentation into these places and write some documentation first time. So if you get down here to the other documents, this is prior documentation that existed before we started this effort that needs moving, editing, updating to move it into here. And then this is the community documentation, which, for example, you see the Universal Chalcedonian Database Project and the link to their documentation that they have, and Tommy's INHS insect collection. And what we did here, by the way, a big shout out to the UCD group, is take their very comprehensive documentation that they have written, and they share through a Google Drive, Google Doc for sources, and use that as the starting point to build our section on the website. Matt, your turn.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes. I'd just like to echo that really we're very grateful, in particular to the UCD project and Tommy for his standard operating procedures. There's a couple of others that I think we're forgetting. Dimitri did a lot of work on those original documents.
Yep.
And what we see is we're really sort of using their work, those three work, as a foundation for trying to organize this in a unified framework. I imagine that each individual project will have some of their own sort of best practices, and it's our goal to merge those things that we feel that are sort of shared across, those best practices that really could be shared across all projects into this document flow. So I'd also mention that there is an issue tracker for this particular code repository. So if you go to the GitHub, Debbie, up there at the top, and go to the docs there, If you want or would like to see something specifically, you can go to the issues there. And a lot of us internally, and we would encourage the community to increasingly think of this issue tracker as the way to ensure that a question is recorded and that it needs to be answered in the documentation. So if you're a user of GitHub, you can easily click on that new issue button and describe your role and what you need. And that at least gives us a record that we're not going to lose in a chat or in a Google Doc or during a conversation. So that's a great way to contribute, is to ask for a specific feature on docs in those issue trackers. I think we should maybe just open it up in the last 8 minutes for questions about it, the docs. Does that sound okay? Yeah.
Yep.
So questions, you can throw them into the chat. I don't see any in the Google Doc.
They can also open their mics if you just want to talk about it or ask a question about it.
So we are definitely still, this is still very much a work in progress, but we feel like this year we've made a milestone in terms of, we made a milestone in terms of getting this foundation in place in both a technical way and a sort of an organizational way. So yeah, docs dot, I'll send it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this, to be very clear, Dimitri, you're here as well. A lot of this, if nomenclature is something you've had questions about, the original documentation for much of that is here.
Yeah, in that
example,
nomenclatural
in
basics.
FAQ
nomenclatural
and basics. Yeah, right.
Oh, my question is, do you have direct links from TaxonWorks to docs from appropriate interfaces?
No, we
Not
don't,
yet.
Dimitri.
Not
Yeah,
yet.
it's a good question. In previous software, for those of you who have used MX or species files, for example, if you were on the taxon name model, you would have a direct link over to here. It's something I think we can do, especially at least to the models that come across, and then as the guide evolves, we can link into there as well. It's a good question. Yeah.
So we have help side panel, so probably.
Yeah, Dima, we could show that maybe. Let's remember to show that when we get to the new features. We can show that live in TaxonWorks. But yeah, Debbie, maybe just clicking on the orange help.
Yeah.
This is also inline, an overlay. You don't see anything here, but there's inline help with the application as well from the orange overlay. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
This is something we talked about as well, because there's also some embedded help in the software, and we're trying to work out how that's exactly going to work. Some of the batch uploaders, the instructions are in the software itself.
Yeah. So let's jump to a couple questions in the chat.
Good.
Davide says, do you have any specific format for the manual? Thinking it could be good to tailor one for the ichneumoniid community. We do have some meta there that's coming. Debbie, if you can show us the about, it's, what is it in? Develop, contributing now. Yeah. And then there's also, so there are some conventions that are there. And there's also conventions about the editing and documentation, how to edit. So there are conventions there. The content and guide will keep evolving, but we have some style conventions. I think they will merge kind of nicely into our model convention. So I think it's coming. And do take a look at what was useful in the UCD document. That has evolved for years now. And that serves a community of the 40 or 50 editors that are in the TaxonWorks and the UCD project. So Tommy says, to give some perspective, we had almost none of this publicly available last year. True, Tommy. So this is amazing. Thanks very much. And Jim asks, Debbie and Matt, many of the topics in the manual sources really better belong in the manual nomenclature. Yeah, Jim, we exactly noticed that. So Debbie has it nicely parceled up. And one of the things and we just wanted to get that text live to have people look at it, but you immediately caught the first improvement that we caught as well. So we're on the same page. We're actually going to show, Debbie, can you show the front matter while I talk here? Within each micro document, there's something called front matter. And in the front matter, you can tag individual chunks of the documentation So you see this little bit between the 3 dashes and the 3 dashes.
Yeah.
So we can actually add tasks like that. This is a scenario. And then ultimately, Jose will do his magic and we will be able to aggregate tagged sets. Yeah. So for example, scenario true, right? And now we know that this little code is a scenario document and we can present those in different places, right? So Jim, we totally acknowledge that we need to move some of those under the sort of frequently asked questions or scenarios for nomenclature, but we also are excited to think about how to dynamically recategorize the help according to the front matter metadata or tags there.
Is we also thought, I mean, the idea is you'd like to find them no matter where you're at, right? So the indexing up here, helping you search for them, but figuring out where these are going to go. And so that if you are here using sources, but then you have that question, making sure that we link them where we can.
Yeah, a big part of it is we want people to use that search first. And if the search doesn't get you to your keyword, then that's a keyword we want to understand and put into the documentation so that it does, right? So if you type homonym like Debbie showed in the search, and it doesn't take you to the complexities of how to handle a homonym, then that's, that needs to happen. And that will get you right towards it. There's TaxonWorks has a huge scope. And people may not memorize all of these left bars as much. So I would say first, let's make sure that we can get to the information through that search field, and then we can constantly sort of normalize it, ontologize it, categorize it.
Yeah. And so just to go back very briefly, then what you asked, Davide, if you go to the develop, contributing now, you can see here all the instructions that talk about, we didn't really go here too, but there's another, if you want to contribute screenshots, for example, how to do that, but you can go and read that. But essentially we have a place in sfg.taxonworks.org where the images that we're using inside the documentation can live. And then we explain here about the markdown, and we explain here about what I was saying earlier about what gets highlighted, how we organize the information is here.
Any last questions? Any aha moments from folks before we turn on to our next section? What do you see is what immediately jumped to mind that is missing? What immediately did you want to have? Like, what questions about TaxonWorks that you don't see sort of covered here that came to mind? And you can always add those to the document as well, but maybe
I thought of one, Matt, all this
Yeah.
work we did on citing TaxonWorks. So how many of
Yeah.
you have used a website and all of a sudden it's, how do I cite the map? How do I cite this page? How do I cite the fill in the blank? And so we tried to be very thorough here and make it very clear how you can cite the code, cite the documentation. Again,
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. That was a major goal. One of our priorities. We talk a lot about priorities during TaxonWorks together, and we unified that. So people asking how to cite data and how to cite code, the examples are there. There's also BibTeX examples of how to represent that. So if you want to know how to cite it, please go to cite, and it's right there on the very top. It's one of my pet peeves is I don't know how to cite things. So there you go for that. Good point. Yeah.